that we're going to fight with these pipelines. We fought it on Keystone XL. We're going to continue to fight it on these carbon pipeline projects. If the state legislature is not willing to amend our eminent domain law, making it clear that private project pipelines cannot use eminent domain, just like solar and wind can't use eminent domain, you get to make a decision if you want those projects on your property. We think that that should be true for pipelines as well. If the legislature isn't willing to do that, Bold Nebraska is already talking to voters like yourself to consider going to the ballot in 2024 and taking it directly to the voters and let the voters decide if pipelines should be able to use eminent domain for private gain. So that's one thing we wanted to make sure that you know. The other concern that we have is that our state is totally unprepared to deal with carbon pipelines. We are a little bit prepared to deal with oil pipelines, and we're a little bit prepared to deal with gas pipelines. But even those two products, there's gaps in regulations from what the federal government does, the state and versus the county. But we have no regulations on the books in our state on if the Public Service Commission is going to review the route of carbon pipelines. They've told us no, that the current state law only tells them that they do that for oil pipelines. Our counties are currently looking at what zoning regulations they can do. Not a single county that we're aware of and the research that we've done has any laws on the books to deal with setbacks, to deal with emergency response plans, and all the other portions that counties can do. So our first and foremost concern is your property rights. We're concerned about the safety. And we're concerned that if a pipeline company is telling you that they want you to sign an easement that is a forever easement, it's not a 25-year easement like wind and solar, it's a forever easement and one payment, and you assume all the risk. And so we have a lot of concerns about that. We have a lot of fundamental problems about that with your property rights. And we're going to talk through some of that tonight and then get to your questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Hi, everybody. Great crowd tonight. So again, my name is Paul Blackburn, and I'm a regulatory attorney. I was originally raised in Iowa, and after law school, I went to the East Coast and worked in Washington, D.C. in one of the high-end energy law firms. And I worked on developing coal-fired power plants, helped to develop waste-to-energy projects, but also wind and solar. And since then, I've worked in a variety of environmental energy law issues. So basically, I was hired by Jane, and she essentially said, well, these are new pipelines and new technology. So learn as much as you can about the commercial aspects of them, about the physical, technical aspects of them, and about the regulatory aspects of them. So that means that I'm here as a resource to help you understand any of those kinds of questions. Now, Brian, who comes next, is going to talk about eminent domain. That's his specialty. But if you have technical, commercial, or regulatory questions, I'm your guy. And if I don't know the answer, because this is all new and it's very complicated, I can also spend time researching it and getting you an answer. So, we're here to support what you guys want to learn and know. What I'm talking about tonight is the 45Q tax credit, which is one of the commercial foundations for these projects. Outline. But if you have questions about it, please let me know. Now, so why are these pipelines all happening? We've got 3 in Nebraska, Summit Navigator and Trailblazer. And the reason is that the federal government passed tax credit enhancements in 2018 that made it financially profitable for them to capture carbon at emitters and then ship it to North Dakota or Illinois or wherever and pump the carbon dioxide underground. So, and then the recent so-called Inflation Reduction Act increased those tax credits massively by 70%. So these pipelines were considered profitable before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. It increased their financial benefits 70%. That 70% increase is pure profit, and it's pure federal pork. There's no way to put it. I mean, they already said they were going to do them, and now the federal government said, hey, let's just throw another $1 billion at you. It's essentially, literally, is what they're saying. And I'll show you some numbers on that. But also the Congress in its infinite wisdom decided to remove the cap. So before, this program had a maximum cap about how it was going to affect the federal deficit, how much money they could spend. Congress completely removed the cap. So this is just completely up to whoever can do these projects and however many can claim these tax credits. So this program could balloon not just to tens of billions of dollars, but this 45Q tax credit could balloon to hundreds of billions of dollars. And again, every other taxpayer is on the hook for this stuff. Now, here's some numbers. These are the Summit Carbon, Summit, Navigator, and Wolf, which is over in Iowa and Illinois pipelines. And you can see, maybe I hope you can see that, but originally under this tax credit program, the maximum they could get based on their pipeline capacities would be just about $2 billion per year, which is a lot of money. But then when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, it increased that to $3.3 billion a year. So when I said that they were going to get these three pipelines together, are going to get another $1 billion in federal tax credits, which they can sell for cash, just because they are in the right place at the right time. So that's the financial footing for these projects. It's a lot of money. But again, there are other projects that could be built. These are only some of the ethanol plants that are hooked up to them. It's only some of the fertilizer plants. They can hook up power plants. They can hook up the rest of the ethanol plants. So when you think about the three pipelines so far, just remember this program is so generous at this point that this could just be the first wave. And that's essentially what the Democrats who passed it want to happen. They want to have this be multiple waves of pipeline projects. They just said that flat out. So, the program is designed to do that, and you should expect that even if you're not hit or your neighbors aren't hit this time around, they could be hit next time around. So, what can counties do about this? And I'm not going to go these in detail, but there's quite a lot that counties can do, especially in Nebraska, because as Jane said, there isn't any state law that regulates these. So there's no what's called preemption by state law of what counties can do. So it's up to counties to regulate these pipelines because there's no state regulation. And while there is federal regulation, it isn't complete. States have always been able to do routing. That this is the same law that regulates oil pipelines, and Nebraska regulates the route of oil pipelines. So Nebraska has just as much route to regulate carbon pipelines. So since the state hasn't regulated the route of these pipelines, counties can do that, and counties all over the Midwest are actually looking into doing this right now. I've been working with a county in Iowa that's moving an ordinance ahead that will influence, control where the route of the pipeline is. So it's something that the counties can do here. And then, part of that is setbacks. The location around a pipeline is not a federal matter. So, but part of the location is setbacks. And the federal courts have been very clear that counties have the right to establish setbacks to establish where these pipelines go. So, these pipelines can be quite dangerous. Well, that means they shouldn't be near hospitals. They shouldn't be near nursing homes. They shouldn't be near schools. They shouldn't be near places where a lot of people are gathered. You all might have heard about the big rupture down in Mississippi near Satartia, where 250 people, had to be evacuated at least, and 50 of them went to the hospital. And the emergency responders are saying people are walking around like zombies because there's so much CO2. There wasn't enough oxygen in the air. The first responders were saying that their quads and their police cruisers were not working properly because there wasn't enough oxygen in the air for those motors to function. And so setbacks from places with high populations in them is really important, and counties could do that. Also, counties could regulate if they want to change a natural gas pipeline to a carbon pipeline. The Trailblazer project wants to change natural gas to carbon dioxide. Counties could have some say in that. Counties can determine mitigation, like what kind of seed mix do you want, and what kind of lift are they going to do for trenching? Is it going to be how they're going to segment the soils? How are they going to do decompaction? What are they going to do with drainage if you've got drainage issues? All those kinds of things counties can work on. Abandoned pipelines. When these pipelines are over with, not being used, if it's a big pipeline, or even it isn't, they can become drainage pipes. If it rusts through and all of a sudden water starts going into that pipe, it can become drainage. Now, Canada, they have a national law where big pipeline companies have to set aside cash money to pay for the cost of abandoning these pipelines or mitigating them. Like Enbridge Pipeline alone has to put $1 billion in cash into the bank to pay for abandonment. You know what the laws are in the U.S.? Nothing. But Minnesota is doing, for both the old Line 3 and the new Line 3, it's doing an abandoned pipeline process. And Enbridge estimated for just old Line 3, the mitigation just in Minnesota would cost $1 billion. So we're talking real money here. And if they don't do it, guess who gets stuck with it? Y'all do, right? So abandoned pipelines is a long-term thing. But, the program right now is a 12-year program for this 45Q. What happens after 12 years? Do they continue it, or do they just stop doing it? And all of a sudden you've had a pipeline they built, said they're going to last for decades, and it's over with, in 12 years. Should they take it off, or do you want to leave it there but mitigate it in other ways? It's lots of questions. A local emergency plan and response. As I said, in Satartia, the firefighters and the police officers were really at risk because they didn't know anything about these pipelines. They went right into that CO2 plume, and it started, affecting them adversely too. And, counties are responsible for their firefighters. Counties are responsible for their sheriffs, keeping them safe. And federal law says that pipeline companies have to coordinate and cooperate with local emergency response officials. Counties can put in specifications for that, can put in regulations for that. For example, requiring information about how much CO2 come out, how far it would likely spread, what other contaminants are in it, what kinds of equipment do they need? Do they need respirators? Do they need some kind of vehicles, like even electric vehicles, just to get into the plume area where the gas vehicles don't work very well? There are carbon dioxide detectors, just like there's carbon monoxide detectors. Should every home have them? One of the CO2 pipelines in North Dakota has a emergency call system where everybody, within a mile of the pipeline gets a call if there's a rupture, so they know how to get the heck out of the area. But that's those kinds of things that a county could require, and it also require the company to pay for. And like I said, if they're going to get an extra $1 billion, these three pipelines together, don't feel sorry for asking for them to do stuff and to pay for stuff, because they're going to be rolling in cash if these things get built. So don't let them off easy. Make sure you protect your police and fire department. And then also, how deep do these pipelines get buried? The pipeline companies run around saying they're going to do like more, go down to 4 feet or whatever. And the standard is 36 inches for federal law. It's not actually correct. The first thing that federal law says is that all hazardous liquid pipelines and carbon dioxide pipelines must be buried below the level of cultivation. And then federal law does not define what the term level of cultivation means. It leaves that up to the states and counties to figure that out. So Minnesota has a law that says they have to go down 4.5 feet. New York has a law, I forget exactly what the number is, but about how deep they have to go. Well, since Nebraska doesn't have a level of cultivation law, the counties could say you have to be below level of cultivation. And in some places, like in Northwest Iowa, where they got a lot of water, that could be 10, 12 feet to go below the tiling. Other places, it might just be a few feet. But ultimately, that's something the counties can decide on. And then, one of the tricky things about carbon dioxide is it can be, but we all know gas, liquids, and solids, right? The three phases of matter. There's actually a fourth called supercritical fluids. And the federal law applies, it's very techy and wonky, only to supercritical fluids. It doesn't apply to liquid CO2 pipelines, and it doesn't apply to gas CO2 pipelines. Now, this new Trailblazer pipeline is a gas CO2 pipeline. So federal safety standards do not apply to Trailblazer. There are no federal safety standards and no state safety standards that would be applied to Trailblazer. And that should give everybody pause. Now, the federal government has said they're going to do new regulations, but that could take years. So what do we do in the meantime to make sure that these pipelines are safe? So anyway, that's what I've got tonight. And again, if you have any questions about these kinds of topics, just please ask. And I'll hand this off to Brian, who's going to talk about eminent domain.
I'm going to give Brian just 2 seconds as he switches PowerPoints. If you did not get a carbon risk booklet, we have more at the door. So when you leave, you can grab one, and business cards are there too to stay in contact with us. If you did not give us your email, please do. That's how we can communicate and let you know about things. And the websites that you should be aware of course, Bold, Nebraska and Nebraska Easement Team. That's where we post information about meetings that we're having for landowners. And then you can also go to pipelinefighters.org. We have monthly webinars on different topics like county ordinances and eminent domain. Brian.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Jane. Great to be here. Great to see some familiar faces. I see some longtime clients in the audience here. Art Tandrup, 12 years client, and Helen, and Richard Johnson. So tonight I'm going to try to go fast, which is a little difficult when you give, a lawyer an open mic here to start talking. But we want to get to your questions. So rather than trying to anticipate every single question you might have, I'm going to try to give you kind of an overview of what's going on, and then you get to your questions. So my experience in pipeline fights, eminent domain, large landowner groups started approximately 12 years ago on the Keystone XL pipeline, which affected people in this community and all across the country. Nebraska was the only state where anyone was able to organize landowners, have meetings like this, probably 100 or more of meetings like this over the years, and then got them together, and through intense legal actions handled by myself, my partner, Dave Domina, and our firm, in conjunction with the great work of other groups like Bold, we're able to protect landowners. And ultimately, this is all about protecting landowners. So Jane had mentioned we have these groups, these easement teams, and that's something that Dave and I created back in 2012, and with 2012, and with the help of Jane and her group, we're able to expand this network across the Midwest. And so as we sit here today, related to the Navigator and Summit pipelines, we are set up in Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota. Wisconsin was a different fight that Paul and I worked on, so I put that up there as well. And bottom line, which you probably don't need to be told, the pipeline companies aren't your friends, they aren't their neighbors, they ultimately don't care about you. They just want to get an easement across your land for as cheap as possible so they can make billions of dollars and leave you with risk. And not pay any real property taxes. You still get to pay the property taxes. You still get to pay insurance. They're not paying insurance, liability insurance. They're not covering you for that. And so we just have a real problem with that, and the fact that they're going to take it as if they're the government because they have a better idea in their minds how to make money off your land than your farming or your ranching. And we just don't think they should be able to take something from you. If you want to give them an easement and you want to negotiate, that's one thing. It's a free country, but don't have the hammer of eminent domain over all of your heads. That's what's not fair, and that's what we have to stop. No one is doing it for you. There's no politician in this state that's standing up to protect you. The governor isn't. The attorney general isn't. We had the same message a decade ago. They haven't done anything since. The legislature hasn't. It's up to you. It's pretty simple. Either you rise up and get organized to protect yourself, or these companies are going to steamroll right through. That's just the way it is. All right. Again, briefly, here are photos of real people from Nebraska, families just like yours that started off in rooms like this, a little skeptical, a little confused back in 2010. And we banded together under the Easement team, the group that Art was a part of, Richard was a part of, and we had a lot of twists and turns, but ultimately protected all of their lands, got easements that had been taken or granted, rescinded, so that threat is not there on all of our clients. You're familiar with the route. This shows Navigator and Summit in Iowa and Nebraska. So there's a little more detailed on the Summit route, and if you've been getting love letters from them, they might have included something like this on Summit, same for Navigator. So it's pretty extensive in Nebraska. So they want to take your land by eminent domain. A brief overview on that. In the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution, the United States Constitution, there's what's called the Takings Clause. And in that, the founding fathers decided that, if there's ever an instance where government needs to obtain private land, say, for instance, an expansion of a roadway, or think of the interstate system, there has to be a means to do that. And you may not even like that, but okay, well, that's, we can kind of wrap our heads around that. But what happens over time, these powers through Supreme Court cases and the Supreme Court making different decisions can get watered down. And worse yet, on a state-by-state basis, your legislator, the people that we send to the unicameral here in Nebraska, can decide to give it to whoever. And they've done that in a lot of cases. I mean, you and I could start an oil company tomorrow, and we would have the power of eminent domain if we just follow a few simple steps, which is kind of scary. Now, in Nebraska, there is no law that specifically says CO2, carbon dioxide pipelines, have eminent domain. And so that's where there's going to be a big fight coming up. Landowner rights, you may not think of it, but if you own land, you can do things to the surface, you can grow crops, you can improve the property, you have rights underground to mineral rights, you have rights in the air to prevent people from coming, too close to your ground, your structures, and you have the right to be free of nuisance and the right to prevent people from coming onto your land. If you give an easement or if one's taken from you, a portion of some or all of these rights are affected. And these companies want to tell you what you can and can't do on the portion of the permanent easement, and that's forever, right? Permanent meaning forever. And they also want to get temporary access easements across your entire property to just go willy-nilly, whatever is the easiest access point for them. And they can come on 24/7, any day, anytime. They don't have to tell you. They don't have to say, is today a good day? Or you have crops out there. It doesn't matter. They can just come right through. So what's an easement? Well, it's something that you're unwillingly selling. It's rights in your real property that once you give away, it means you now don't have certain rights. And the company who has it is able to do certain things. And it's on, under, across, and through. Like I said, you still pay the property taxes. Okay, they're not picking up the property tax on the 50-foot easement for a half mile, a mile, depending on how big your property is. They want to pay you one time in today's dollars. They don't ever want to pay you in the future again. If you settle with them, like I'm sure some of your neighbors have, they try to pay in advance payment for damages, so that if the damages are worse in the future, because we have no idea what they're going to be now, and so if they're worse in the future, you don't get to go back and say, well, yeah, you paid me a couple thousand, but actually soil compaction, soil mixing, the fertility loss, yield loss, it was 20,000. Well, remember, back in 2022, when you signed this, it's done. We paid you, so pound sand. That's the attitude. And so they can get easements. If the law gives them the power by condemnation, they can take you to court. And then there's a process by how that's figured out, how those rights are taken, or you can willingly enter into an agreement. Those are the only two ways that an easement can come on your land. So survey, I briefly want to touch on this. Again, there are no CO2 specific laws in our state that say these pipeline companies are condemnors or have the right of condemnation. So if you don't have eminent domain power specifically conferred or given to you by our state legislature, and again, you're not going to find carbon dioxide pipelines with eminent domain anywhere in our state laws, my argument is then you don't get to use our survey laws, which are found here, which are reserved to condemnors. You are not a condemnor unless you have eminent domain powers. So eminent domain is the power and condemnation is the process of exercising those eminent domain powers. So the law gives condemnors the power. Again, if they are not a condemnor or are not conferred, given, granted eminent domain by our state specifically, my argument is then they can't enter any of your properties to do these surveys. Now, they'll send you threatening letters after they first try to butter you up. You ignore them, harassing phone calls, knocks on the door, sorry we missed you, all this kind of nonsense. I see nodding heads in the room. And then they'll start to ratchet it up. Now the letters will get a little more direct. And then they're going to try to say, well, we have the right under 76702. Well, no, you don't. Show me where the state has given you the power of eminent domain. And that's going to be a big showdown and a fight. They want to get on your land to do a survey. But do you think with all the satellite technology that we have out there that they really need to step foot on your property to know if there's a stream or what the elevation is? They want to get the door cracked open to develop a dialogue with you because they think once you've said one yes, it's like sales. Once I get one yes, the second yes is a little easier, and then third and fourth and fifth. And now they're looking around and, oh, what a nice place you have. And look at your cattle. And, well, that guy wasn't so bad. And because those are the salespeople, right? And then here come in the heavy hitters when it comes to negotiation time. And so if they offer to pay you, what are they going to give you? A 1099. And to fill that out, what do you need to give them?
social security number. Now they have your social security number. They can run background checks. They can figure out what type of loans you have and all sorts of information to use against you in the future. And it's not worth $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever they would offer you, in my opinion. All right. Switching to liability, because people talk about that. And I've heard this across the states. Well, they said, it's their pipeline, and if it breaks, it's their responsibility. And I'm like, oh, really? Did they say that? Where's that written in the contract? Well, I've never looked. I said, well, you better start looking. Anything they say to you is worthless. You all know that. We can just talk and talk and talk. It means nothing. I mean, show me in the document, put your money where your mouth is. Well, we've seen examples. This is right here in Auburn, Nebraska. Landowner didn't know a pipeline was there. The company had come and gone, been making their profits. The little signs that say hazardous pipeline, they didn't maintain them, rusted, corroded. Ended up, the son of the landowner ended up hitting these fuel pipelines, and 250,000 gallons of fuel just spread into streams and onto the surface of the farm and elsewhere. Have to shut the pipeline down, right? So what do you suppose when the pipeline's not running and moving fuel or whatever the product is? They're not making money. Their customers are pretty unhappy. So then what do you think the pipeline company did? They didn't say, well, remember when we talked to your grandparents 60 years ago, we said, don't worry, we'll handle it. This isn't your fault. You didn't try to break it. You didn't know. No, they sued our clients for $5 million in federal court, a number that would have bankrupted this family and put them out of business for everything they've ever worked for. So, I didn't come here to scare people and say all sorts of crazy things. You can Google this up. These are real people, our clients we had to represent to try to get them out of this nonsense. And if you're not careful, this can happen. Is it going to happen to everyone in this room? Of course not. But it can happen to one of you. And if you're that one, the fact that it didn't happen to anyone else doesn't really matter. All right. This could be in your future trenching. Just quickly on this, Summit Carbon Pipelines and Navigator, they don't build pipelines. They hire the lowest bid contractors from Oklahoma or elsewhere to come in here, have their man camps, build these as fast and cheaply as possible, and then get the heck out of here. Okay. Do you see how this is being carefully screened off? Any of the soil or any precautions being taken? I mean, this is literally in someone's front yard down in Texas, one of my clients. And so when you're dealing with a company that doesn't own, operate, or maintain a single inch of a supercritical CO2 pipeline, zero experience, these companies, and then they hire lowest bid contractors, you can run into big problems. They're bending the pipe. And then here, so you would think, well, okay, I don't want it to explode. Yeah, that makes sense. But what about all of the trenching, the digging, the earthwork that then shifts a foundation on the house, that then severs a sewer line, that then causes black mold to get into the home? And my clients in Texas ended up having to tear down the home that had been in their family for 130 years because of the low bid contractors, and the fine print didn't protect them because they didn't have any say in the matter on the easement. All right. Another quick example, oral promises about what they would be paid for crop damage. Sounded great, $8 a bushel. This is back in 2014, right, when corn prices were pretty high. We've been back there recently. All sounded good, except didn't get it in writing. And now the pipeline company, oh, Bob doesn't work here anymore. And, oh, did you have anything on that? Well, no, he told me. I trusted him. Yeah, I'm sorry. Ended up getting cents on the dollar because, again, trusted him. It wasn't in writing. All right, so on the easement, lots that we can discuss on the easement. I'm sure you have questions. I touched on some of them. The negligence piece, there's a provision in there that, landowners and your invitees, hired people, anyone you allow to come on your property, if you are negligent in any way, you could be deemed liable for any spill, rupture, etc. Did you drive a combine across the easement? Did you have a grain truck at harvest that weighed 20, 30, 50,000, etc. pounds driving across the easement? Well, maybe you led to that little rupture or pinhole fracture that then led to a rupture, etc. Unless the landowner intentionally commits a criminal act, an intentional bad act, tries to shoot the pipeline with a shotgun, etc., you should have no liability. And until that's taken out, no one should be signing any easements. There's a lot of other things to be, kind of weary about. These pipelines are good for potentially 12 years because that's the tax credits, that we only have 12 years of tax credits. And then they can't survive without the government giveaway of billions of dollars, your money. So you are funding these carbon pipeline companies so they can take your land and rights away from you. Okay, you need to think really long and hard about how ridiculous that is. And that's why the marketing they're using is, but this is good for ethanol. We're the saviors of ethanol. And without us, ethanol, we can't sell to California, as if we want to send all of our ethanol to California for some reason. And we can't do all these great things. It's nonsense. Look at ethanol plants. They're doing fine. Some are reporting record profits. You're getting distribution checks. I like putting ethanol in my car from being from the Midwest. I think it's great. But the point is, we don't need to take your land from you so that ethanol plants can, have a little bit bigger distribution check. Okay. It's not right. It's not fair. And it's a lie. So let's get to NEAT. Phase 1 is things like this. We do landowner outreach, education, events, updates, and Jane and her group are really instrumental via the easement teams and Bold doing all those kind of things. Phase 2, now we look at, are there legal actions we can take collectively in this state to protect each and every one of you? What are they? What do they look like? Can, as Paul touched on, county actions. Can we talk to the county commissioners, board of supervisors? Hey, you need to put in intelligent regulations to protect us because no one else is doing it. We're doing that in Iowa and South Dakota and looking at it in North Dakota. Phase 3, if necessary, meaning, okay, folks, the writing's on the wall. There's too much money. All the politicians have sold out. We've done what we can. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you. It's time to try to negotiate. Then we would get to, if necessary, negotiate better terms than the ones that their hundreds of lawyers have written to protect and mitigate and minimize their risk and make their investors feel happy that they'll never have a big loss. Okay, we got to do better. And then if you say, I don't even want to talk to them, that's fine too. Then we move for you into the other phase, which is condemnation. And if you want to, you can go through court. The lawsuit would be in your county. You'd have a jury of your peers, other farmers, other rural folk that would probably be sympathetic to your cause. And then you can have your day to explain why the amount of money they're offering you is just not enough. It's not fair. Usually the cases end in settlement because the pipeline companies do not want to be in court against hundreds of people all across Nebraska, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota. So they talk tough, but if you hold out, even if you're scared, just bluff them the best you can. I would never sign an easement over my dead body. You will get paid more if that's your ultimate goal, and you'll have the best leverage to negotiate better easement terms. Okay, so people say, well, I just want to negotiate. I don't want to be a part of any legal action to stop this. The legal action designed to stop and slow this down is your best negotiating tool. Because if they know they can't steamroll and run over you and you're part of a bigger group, they have to take you more seriously. They can't just pat you on the head and, okay, we'll see you in court. They know they have to pay up, like they're doubling the payments in South Dakota now, and some are getting really, really out of hand, which is great. All the people in South Dakota are welcome for everything we're doing for them. So those are kind of the phases right there. Again, we've got the network built out, so we share information across all the states. It's not just Nebraska. We know what tricks they're doing in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa. Same for the Navigator pipeline. And again, we deal with the communications. So if you don't want to deal with communications, I'm a part of NEAT. I've hired Domina Law. Stop talking to me. Okay. A lot of people find value in that. Compile information, share across the entire Midwest of the best practices, latest tricks, etc. Communicate those and the legal actions, like I mentioned them. And then again, force easement terms as the final phase, if and when that is ready to happen. There's a one-page agreement to sign. It's available online. It's not secret. It's not tricky. I drafted it, so it should be pretty straightforward. And again, one page. It's available on nebraskaeasement.org, on Join Nebraska Easement Team, so nebraskaeasement.org. It's right there. It's kind of all for one and one for all. And so the model that we came up with is pretty simple. We have to spread these costs out, right? None of you, I don't care, maybe we have a billionaire sitting in the room, and that's great, but even you can't afford all of this on your own, or if you could, you probably don't want to, right? The more people that are in, the lower the price. We do the work, and if there's 10 people, you're all in for 1/10. If there's 100 or more than 100, like we have in Iowa and South Dakota, approaching 200 families, it's the 1/200th of the fraction. That's the only way this makes sense. It's the only way Art and Helen and others and Richard were able to stay in the fight for 12 years. We just couldn't. You can't fight mega billion-dollar corporations who have all the access to all of your money via their eventual 45Q tax credit giveaways. You can't fight them unless you have groups like this and then multiply ourselves. So I just threw a lot at you, but it was intentional to get any brainstorming going. And so we can kick it open to questions. Please don't be shy. It's always a little slow starting off on the questions and then people really get going. But if you're thinking it, someone else in the room is too. So let's just get your questions answered and see if this makes sense and what we can do together. Yes, sir. Well, 50 feet, right? But even that's the setback. So I think Paul's going to tell you there is no restriction. They'll tell you 50 foot.
There is no restriction. The 50 foot is not a setback. What the 50 foot says is if you build closer than 50 feet, you have to put another foot of dirt over the top of it. The company calls it a setback, but a setback is you can't build within 50 feet, period. This is if it's within 50 feet, they can do it. They just have to put another foot of dirt over the top of it. And, it's not hard to put another foot of dirt over the top of a pipeline. So they can always put it within 50 feet. And, I was around there for about the first Keystone pipeline. It went right through Yankton. They were within 20 feet of homes going right through Yankton,
And we'll repeat the questions for people on Facebook Live. So that question was, how close can a pipeline come? And in Nebraska, we don't have state laws, but counties can pass them. So can the legislature. Other questions?
So, Paul, you mentioned that counties need to regulate. During the presentation, were you suggesting that counties can regulate this to such an extent that they can't come in and do this at all?
So the question was, can counties essentially zone out pipelines? Like some counties have zoned out wind and solar. Paul?
That's a good question. And the answer is that if counties try to do something to zone it out completely, that there would be a risk of a federal lawsuit. And so that means that there could be some problems with doing that. Now, there's lots of other things that counties can do that don't include zoning it out, getting rid of it entirely. But the other question is, well, what if the state decides not to give eminent domain? Well, eminent domain is sort of a sacred state right. And the federal government, I don't think, can force a state to use to give away its eminent domain rights. So, that may overcome that zoning out. It's a part of the Interstate Commerce Clause is what you're getting at.
I just wanted to add on to that. And so, Paul's answer is absolutely correct. If you pass a resolution, by golly, in Madison County, we're not going to have eminent domain pipelines. So that's not going to hold up. I'm sorry, it's just not going to hold up. But what my clients in McPherson County, South Dakota did, they looked and said, well, shoot, we already have a mile setback for wind and solar projects. So it would be reasonable, which is the key word in the law whenever you're trying to do anything, it'd be reasonable that CO2 pipelines have a mile setback. And then maybe we can strengthen that from, like, for instance, hospitals, et cetera. Then you pull out Google Maps and you think, okay, so if a setback's a mile and we have hospital, nursing home, elementary school, whatever it is, maybe a primary residence that's occupied more than 6 months out of the year, whatever, you start to look and it's like, wow, it's going to be hard for them to come into this county. So you want to do something that's enough to put up a defense, but not so much that it's unreasonable. So setback of 50 miles, well, that's not going to work. A mile, that's just scientifically justified by what we know what happened in Mississippi, mile setbacks, and people were still, feigning, practically dying. And so that's where you want to go. There's no kill shot, okay? But do something reasonable. Have the county board has a discussion. It appears reasonable. You've got the minutes drawn up. You pass the resolution. And now I think you're in pretty decent shape on that. Next question. Yes, sir.
This is more of an engineering question. I did the math in my head, and I think of it in terms like anhydrous ammonia. It hangs to the ground. It's a gas. In fact, you can smell that. This you can't smell. If you had a 1 foot pipeline, 1 mile would be the equivalent of like 40 anhydrous tanks. But I asked the guy who was negotiating Summit last week, he says, well, they have a valve. He says, well, I think it's every 21 miles. And
Well-
if that burst, would that all have to bolt out, for 21 miles, it would all have to turn to a gas before it stopped? Any way they could shut that off if in the case of emergency?
Yep. So the question is, it's sort of a multi-part question, but part of it is, how much CO2 would come out, how much carbon would come out from one of these pipeline ruptures, and what would limit the amount of CO2 that would come out, and and what. Anyway, so I'll start with that. The CO2 is at high pressure. The supercritical pipelines are going to operate at up to close to 2,200 psi. For those, it doesn't mean much. A car tire is 30. This is the kind of pressure that's in a acetylene tank or in a scuba tank. Very high pressure inside that pipeline. So as soon as it ruptures, all the pipeline is going to go to atmospheric pressure, which means that the vast majority, almost all of that CO2 is going to come out. There's nothing to stop it except for where the valves are located. So all the CO2 comes out between a set of valves. Now the question is, where should those valves be? Unfortunately, federal law is written for oil pipelines, and the federal law says, well, they should be around waterways, which kind of makes sense because oil gets in water, it spreads. Having that be a factor for carbon dioxide pipelines doesn't make any sense at all. What should be done here is determine where the hospitals, nursing homes, schools, higher residence, and where people are living, and the valves should be positioned to make sure that the plume that comes out is not too big, so it won't go too far. And this is a matter of money, right? These valves cost money. They're going to get a lot of money. So maybe they should put the valves a lot closer together, and that would make the risk of these pipelines significantly less. So that's the kind of thing we could do with this kind of. Now, can counties regulate that? No. The federal government gets to regulate how the pipelines are designed and constructed, maintained, and operated. But on the other hand, in Minnesota with Enbridge, the state would say, well, we know we can't force you to do things, but it would sure be nice if you guys would put valves closer together, and you could also pester the federal government and say they should put these valves close together. So even though it's not legally on the table for a county to say where those valves are going to go, counties and local governments, state governments, and people still have ability to influence it. And again, it's a matter of money. The valves are not hard to put in. It's just are they going to pay up some more money to have the valves be close together? So Tarsher was 9 miles of pipe that vented, right? So 21 miles is a really long distance. They should put the valves closer together.
I just wanted to add something to Paul mentioned there. So, to about 2,100 PSI, that's the maximum. But unlike oil pipelines, that if all the pressure went out and the oil just sat there, there's not going to be a catastrophic issue, right? But CO2 pipelines, supercritical, also have a minimum PSI. So the degree of the management and the technical expertise and the amount of monitoring that has to be done and all of the potential places of failure, because we have to maintain a minimum, we have to keep it from going under maximum, and it has to stay there. Getting out of either of a low PSI or the high PSI can be catastrophic. So these are much more dangerous and they're much harder to manage and operate. All right, next, yes, ma'am. Yep, that's a great question. And so back during the KXL days, we landowners, Art, Jane, myself, and others were able to force a special session of the legislature where they went back in session specifically and only to create laws, the Major Oil Pipeline Siting Act, to deal with major crude oil pipelines. There is no such act for CO2 pipelines. There is no process. There is no agency, group, board that oversees the CO2 pipeline eminent domain process. And so that's why I think they're going to tell you, well, we're transporting a gas and, this law kind of talks about that. So therefore we have eminent domain. But that's where there's going to be a fight. So short answer, nobody. Why? Because the people we elect to go down to Lincoln haven't created any laws to deal with this, and they're not talking about it, although I know Jane's trying to get people on that. But there's no protections, there's no process where you can even be heard and say, no, this is not appropriate for eminent domain. It doesn't exist. So again, like we did a decade ago, we might have to force another fight on that.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
What is the difference with the eminent domain in Iowa compared to Nebraska? Because I know you're fighting really hard up there in Sioux County.
Yeah. So the question was, what is the difference of eminent domain in Iowa or Nebraska? And the different, and even South Dakota, North Dakota, et cetera. The difference is whether or not a specific state's legislature has gone the extra step for the pipeline company, laid out the red carpet, and put out a process of where they can do eminent domain. In Iowa, there's a specific process to your question, ma'am. They go before the Iowa Utility Board, which is like our Public Service Commission, and the Iowa Utility Board then does, a hearing, and we're going through months and months of data and getting evidence, et cetera. Then we have like a trial. And then in Iowa, the IUB makes a decision per parcel on whether or not eminent domain should be granted on your ground. And they literally go through step by step, which is kind of amazing, really. Here, because we don't have any laws, no one's put the laws, there is no process. In South Dakota, if you can convince the judges up there that you are a common carrier, then you are automatically get eminent domain. And so a long time ago, the biggest lobbying money are within oil, gas pipelines, right? So they get all the laws they want. And then here comes CO2 pipelines. Well, if we just put CO2 after oil, gas, and CO2, now we get all the benefits of those laws by just putting those two words in the existing laws. So in South Dakota, if they are deemed a common carrier, boom, they have the right of eminent domain, and they just kind of have to get a rubber stamp in some respects from their Public Utility Commission. But the reason it's different is simply because our state legislature here has not taken upon itself to lay out a process. So we don't have one. We don't have a mechanism, a scheme work, a framework in order to go about it.
So Iowa could get this stopped for the state of Nebraska.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. And that's why I had kind of those maps up there and why the network's kind of important. So, Navigator's going west to east, terminating in Illinois. Summit is going from Iowa all the way up to North Dakota. So we've got them going, starting and ending in different directions. Well, for Summit, if they have problems in Iowa, well, then they're not getting into Nebraska. If they have problems in Nebraska, they're not getting into South Dakota. If they have problems in South Dakota, they're not getting into North Dakota. So it's very exciting this time around because we here are running the entire multi-state strategy, and one victory anywhere could be a victory everywhere. And so, yes, is it possible? Now, I'm not going to say, oh, yeah, it's 90%. It's not. These are, the odds are against us, as you might already realize, but it's possible. We've done it before. In my 12 years doing it, I've never been a part of a losing fight, and I don't intend to start now. So hopefully, if we get, enough people, we can actually do it this time too. Other questions, comments, concerns, anyone having bad experience or, the annoying calls from the land agents being pestered or surveys that you want to share or anything? I see some head nods. Maybe I might just ask, Richard or Art, if you just want to, 30 seconds, a minute on the benefits of the group and the process and what we put together and how it helped you on the Keystone battle, if you just want to share, so they hear it from a landowner that was a part of it, not just us.
Come up here, Rich.
My experience, we were on the Keystone.
Can you come up here, Fred?
Yeah.
Can you come up here so the people online can hear it?
Yeah, Art, why don't you come up too? It's just, I can drone on and on, but there are real people that have been through this, so it's probably better to hear from them. Yeah. So hold this, talking to both of them. Hold this one and also talking to this one. Yeah. So scoot a little bit.
Yeah, I would just say my experience.
In the both mics, please.
Okay. We had the initial contact from, in our case, it was TransCanada. But once we joined NEAT, we could just tell them, no, we are represented by the law group, so that contact just stops. And there's strength in numbers, and they'd like to pick you off one by one. So the more united you are, the better position you'll be in.
Okay, thanks, Rich. I guess Rich got this figured out, so I know what to do now to talk into both mics. Okay, my name's Art Tandrup, and we've been with that long battle with Keystone XL. And I tell you, we were, maybe at first a little bit leery about, I never hired a lawyer in my entire life to do anything, and why should I have to do this now? Why can't I tell just this big foreign corporation, no, you keep off my land? Well, they said, we're coming anyhow. And so we went to a couple meetings like this, and it didn't take us long to realize the significant benefits of joining the NEAT organization. And yeah, it's just a few bucks to get into it, and the savings that you'll have down the road will be significant. In my particular case, several times we went to the Supreme Court, but in one particular case, Antelope County, which I'm in, the landowners there went to the Supreme Court, and these guys took us all the way. We won that Supreme Court battle. And because of that Supreme Court battle, I don't know how many $1,000s these guys made for me, so I didn't have to come up with it out of my pocket. They are looking out for you. It's a positive thing to do. If you go out and hire an attorney on your own, I'll bet none of them have had probably any experience with pipelines. They don't know where to begin. They don't know what the laws are. They have no idea. These guys are the experts. They go all over the United States to deal with these kind of cases, and their experience makes them the best in the country. So I would encourage every one of you, if you haven't joined NEAT, go ahead and do it. And as some people we were talking to earlier, being harassed by these people all the time, that can be stopped immediately. I remember to the day when we did that, and it was unbelievable. The letters stopped coming, the phone calls stopped coming, the visits stopped coming. Wow, what a change it made. And so I guess once again, if you don't want these crazy things on your farms and your land, you need to join NEAT so that you can, go with that.
Just to give us an idea, how many miles or feet did you have, and how much did it cost you? Do you have any rough ideas for that fight?
Okay, it came across our quarter section. It was over half mile long, because just like the maps I've seen for these, they like to run at an angle across your land. And I'm thinking we probably spent total over 10 plus years, less than maybe $3,000, which to me was, you go in and talk to a lawyer for a few hours, and that looks like peanuts. So very, when you spread the cost out, it makes it very reasonable for everyone. So okay. And he didn't pay me to say
I was
that.
just going to say, I haven't seen Art in many, many months. Didn't even know he's going to be here, but I appreciate all of that, Art, and Richard as well. So thanks, guys. I will say to that question of about 3,000 for Art over 11 years. There was a specific case we were able to win that forced the company to pay he and Helen with 12 or some, I don't remember how many thousand back. So that may or may not be available. I just want to be, clear. But even if you would have had to pay that over 12 years, we're talking about like $1,200 a year over a decade, which I don't think this is going to last anywhere near that personally.
But anyway, that gives you some idea. Yeah, it's not, tens and tens of thousands of dollars if people are thinking. It's not anywhere like that. All right.
What are the odds these pipelines actually happen?
Well, great question. Because they are dependent on all the dominoes falling right across every single state, we have a chance. The best thing we could do is get the laws changed that take away eminent domain power. South Dakota is looking at that, and I think they're going to make a serious run at it based on all my contacts and people there. Iowa is trying to do it, not as much support there. I think we actually have a chance. On the other hand, the billions and billions and billions of dollars that are being thrown at these companies, just, go get it. That makes it an extremely uphill battle, no doubt. Now, might it be the chance where we could stop one, but another goes through? I could see that happening. My honest answer is I think we are going to see at least one of these pipelines because of the money and the politics are behind it. But that doesn't mean it has to go across your land, right? We can, like Art, they rerouted around Art's land. We did a lot of different things for Art, and they ultimately rerouted. I've got people in South Dakota that are the noisiest, the loudest, the most opposition. They're getting rerouted around. Surprise. And so will one of these likely happen? Probably. I don't like saying that, but that's the truthful answer. Are they all going to happen? Probably unlikely. Are they going to happen on the exact route that they've shown you that, by God, this is what we're doing? No, we're going to be able to force changes there at a minimum. I think I saw this gentleman. Yes, sir.
I've seen some of the leases or easements that were filed. They're filed on a whole quarter or a whole 80. And that's unbelievable to me that they're just subject to the company to summit. Maybe releasing on just the strip in the future, or maybe not.
Well, great point. And so, the easement is permanent and forever, right? Forever is a long time. And so they never have to release it. And why would they? Because 12 years from now, when the tax credits are up, if the next administration even renews them or doesn't cancel them, then now these pipeline companies have a very valuable asset, access and a pipeline across your land. And here comes, well, we want to convert it to this. And by the way, we already have the easement and it's forever. So too bad for you. And you're not going to get paid again, by the way. And so these are incredibly valuable to have thousands, 2,000 miles in Summit's case of infrastructure that they can sell, transfer, trade, assign, sell it to China, sell it to Saudi Arabia. There's no restrictions. So you might say, I like Summit. They're good guys. That's fine. But you realize that they're just going to flip this company, sell it. Those guys are going to cash out, and it's going to be some gigantic, probably foreign-owned company that controls the easement on all of your land. That's the business model they have. So, all right. Any other questions? I don't want to keep you all night, but I definitely want to get to you. All right, looks like we have one more. But again, please ask them if you have anything, folks.
The so-called survey company that was hired by the pipeline dug stuff into the county roads.
Oh, yeah, well, that's okay. So again, these pipeline companies don't really do anything. They just hire everyone else that supposedly knows what they're doing at the cheapest rate. Survey companies, again, you see the out-of-state license plates, right, of all these guys running around doing surveys. Well, in Nebraska and South Dakota, they just go to the county roads, drill a hole to try to find the pins, for the rods, for the surveys, stakes, and maybe they patch it up and maybe they don't, and they don't ask for permission, and they just have their trucks on the roadway and they're trying to get around them. And it's like, how is this even, possible? This was happening all over in South Dakota. What do? You call the sheriff, you call the county attorney. What's going on? Well, I guess they can probably do that. I don't know. And well, they fixed it anyway. It's like wimps. Everywhere we're dealing with wimps and people that aren't standing up for you. That's the reality, people with no backbone. And so if you're a sheriff and you're elected, you must have wanted to be a sheriff, so do something. If you're on a county commission, do something, right? We are electing you to be there to protect us in the county. So there's going to be frustrating stories like that. The answer is, what are the people with any power doing to police that, right? I mean, they're destroying, it's a felony to destroy public property, but whatever, go ahead. I mean, it's really getting out of hand, and they're kind of like, reckless cowboys. They just think they can do whatever they want. And it's a bully. If you don't stand up to a bully, they're just going to keep coming. Yep. Frustrating for sure. Okay. Anyone else? I'm sure someone else has yes, sir. Okay. Any county commissioners brave enough to say you are here? And if you are, good for you, because you're getting educated. Yeah, so at least if they aren't raising their hand. And I'm not attacking county commissioners. I'm just saying, my goodness, I mean, protect your county, right? County roads, that's one of the primary responsibilities of a county commission, to protect the roads. To Paul's point earlier, are there permits fees that your county has to have road crossing, road haul agreements? Are they just going to tear up the roads with their gigantic equipment and then leave all the trouble for you and try to get you to pay your taxes to fix the roads? I mean, do they have an inspection process that they pay for? Or they take photos before and after? I mean, who, if anyone, is thinking of these things that all need to be happening? So that's another thing that we also work on.
Yeah, I'll just add that I just did a presentation with another attorney in Iowa to 54 county commissioners and county staff at the Iowa State Association of Counties Convention. And so, the counties there are looking at an ordinance, and Shelby County has an ordinance that's moving through its process. And one of the elements of that ordinance is how to protect the roads, agreements, fees, fines, those kinds of things to make sure the roads are protected. But they're also looking at all the other issues I laid out there, the route, the setbacks, the abandonment, all those things. And they're going to be moving ahead with that ordinance. And so, we expect other counties will be doing that too soon.
Okay, so yes.
Do you have some sort of a blueprint to approach the county boards to educate them on the issue, to help somebody who educate them to be able to present the case?
You literally must be reading my mind, like Stranger Things. I don't know if you watch Stranger Things. Your kids or grandkids probably do. Okay, so there is a sample ordinance in your packet that is modeled on Nebraska state law. So you can bring that to your county commission. You can take extra booklets and bring those to your county commissioners. We've sent the sample ordinance to every single county commissioner in the state of Nebraska that the pipeline or one of the pipelines is going through. So they also have it. And Paul is an expert who can come and give presentations. I know individuals have presented in front of their county. We strongly encourage you. Usually in our counties, we know who our county commissions are because we all live in small counties. So we really encourage you to sit down with them, show them the ordinance. Paul can come in and visit with them specifically or do a Zoom with your county commissioners as well.
Question online for Brian Jorde. If you have an existing easement, can that be changed when the pipeline changes to CO2?
Okay, so the question is, if you have an existing easement, I'm assuming with obviously an existing pipeline, can there be a conversion? The answer is yes. And in fact, Trailblazer, I don't know if people are familiar with Trailblazer Tallgrass, that's an existing natural gas pipeline through Nebraska that they're petitioning FERC, which is the federal body that could give them an abandonment so they could cease doing natural gas and then convert it to, they think they can convert it to, which we are dubious on that, to CO2. And that's what they're trying to do. So the answer is yes. If the easement, you don't negotiate some type of a provision, then anything that's not said, they can go ahead and do.
And I'll just add that, if your county has zoning, one of the things that zoning does is it deals with changed uses. So, for example, if a county has zoning, it can say that a convenience store next to a school can't be turned into a strip club. That's a change in use. And the same way, changing a use from a natural gas pipeline to a carbon dioxide pipeline, it's just a change in use. It's the same situation. So counties could, put in conditions. So, for example, natural gas pipelines have very different safety issues than carbon dioxide pipelines. So the county could require the emergency response, protections and things like that as a condition for changing the use. So yeah, it is possible to regulate a changed use from carbon dioxide or from natural gas to carbon dioxide. So that is possible.
I just, for the person who asked that question, they might be a Trailblazer person that has it. And so for any Trailblazer people that have existing pipelines, I just want to add that if the easement doesn't say, they can transport CO2, we have an argument that they cannot do that. Okay, so they're going to say we can convert it. My argument's going to be your initial easement that my great grandfather signed over didn't say anything about a pipeline for supercritical carbon dioxide. Therefore, at the very least, the pipeline exists, I get that, but at the very least, you're going to renegotiate with me now if you want to do something, or you're going to see me in court. So you've got to take those extra steps. But once the pipeline's there, obviously it's a lot easier for them to get politicians, people on board to do fixes. So that's why trying to keep it out is obviously the first line of defense. So.
Okay, we are going to wrap up, and I'll just say a few things as we wrap up. There's extra booklets here on the table as you leave, as well as Shelley, raise your hand, landowner organizer, and Tom, raise your hand, landowner organizer. I'm sure you've gotten phone calls from them, hopefully not as harassing as Summit and Navigator. Their business cards are on the table. My business cards are there as well. This team will stay here afterwards and answer any individual questions you may have. This team's also here for the long haul. We never gave up on landowners on the Keystone XL pipeline, even when we saw very dark days of that fight. We're in it for the long haul here as well. We know that there's landowners in the room that may be of two camps. One that wants to negotiate but wants better terms and better price. And then there may be landowners in the room that want to fight this till the bitter end and try to stop it all together. We represent both groups of landowners, and we know that landowners sometimes go in between those depending on what's happening in your life or the more you learn, et cetera. But we're here for the long haul. Our goal is to protect your property rights. I'm really proud that a lot of faces are here again today after coming to maybe 2 or 3 different ones over the past couple of months. If you do join the Nebraska easement team, we will have a landowner only who have joined the easement team on September 12th. You'll get an email about that. You'll get phone calls as well, but so you can put that on your calendar if you've already joined or if you think you're going to join. September 12th, Brian's going to facilitate a Zoom just with landowners who've signed to talk about next legal steps that we may be thinking about doing, which we don't want to talk about here because, Summit and Navigator may be here. So there you go. All right. We have the legal forms here as well. Yes. Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, we always, our line with each other is that the pipeline companies never lie, but they never tell the truth. They always use language to wiggle themselves out of a situation. And my only advice is a couple of things. One, take pictures so we can use it in future lawsuits. So next time that happens, or if they're trespassing on your land. If they are trespassing on your land, file a complaint, trespassing with your local sheriff. Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what landowners do. The only way that we protect our property rights is if we're vigilant about using every tool that's on the current legal books and then fighting to make sure we get other laws on the books. Yeah.
And then they said they do it on blacktop highways. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did it in Iowa too. It's awful. It's awful. We definitely have good pictures to be able to use. Yeah, I want to know too. I want to know why they're using my tax dollars for a big climate scam of giving billions of dollars to these carbon pipelines. And I want to know why the federal government or our state government hasn't banned eminent domain for private gain yet. It's pretty basic. Pretty basic job description. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll stick here and answer other questions.